And I was just like, I did it. I'm basing my main character on this person. You know what I mean? Like, and sometimes it just like happens like that. And he's also a writer and all that other stuff. So, experience meeting people, just having conversations.
So he's got to be somewhat consistent in most things that he does, you know. And I didn't want him to be a bad guy, but Trent's right. I mean, you can't really assign a sense of total good or bad because you never know what situation
Yeah.
the guy's gonna.
Like, he specifically called that out. Like, that was so interesting. Sometimes like when those things happen, like, okay, that actually made an impact.
Yeah, you killed the enlisted guy off, and I was like, bro, like, why are you killing the?
All right, welcome to our second episode on Seegmiller Publishing. This is the second episode on our Books and Brothers series, a place where we get together and talk about our books, other books, like things that we just want to review and talk about, or any things that have to do with writing or the publishing industry in general. And today we have a special guest with us. But to start with, I'm Brett, and
I'm Nate.
oh, cool. And today we have Trent. He's also one of our brothers. So there's 6 of us all together. But Trent, do you want to spend a second introducing yourself?
Sure. I think I'm the only person here that actually hasn't finished a book. I'm child number 3, so I probably possess the most anger out of everybody. 3 of 6. I don't know. That's just like a middle child thing, right? But yeah, I just retired from the Air Force after doing 20 years, 7 months, and 7 days. So I retired a couple months ago, and I'm related to you, chuckleheads. So reading though has been like a lifelong. I don't know, want to say passion. That sounds weird, but I'm so passionate about reading.
Such a nerd.
Yeah. So yeah, happy to be here, y'all, on the Brothers podcast. Are we going to exclude any of our brothers? Like there's 6 of
Only
us.
that one problem child. We all know
That
who
one
that
guy.
is.
Got it.
The youngest.
But that's the thing. It's Nate and I got together last week and we did our first ever episode, and that was definitely one thing that came up was, with the household that we grew up in, we kind of told the story about how our TV exploded, and we all kind of grew up with this love and fascination of books and stories. And I remember, like, all of us, to one extent or another, we're all kind of bouncing story ideas off each other, or we were talking about books and themes and things that we were learning about and the things that we were reading. So we'd always kind of get around and have these like long form discussions way before podcasting was a thing.
Yeah. I mean, and our household was a little bit weird too, because it's funny where I meet people and they're like, I didn't understand that politics were a thing until much later, right? So like we read a lot and then we talked about politics, and I think
Mhm.
having that connection to the real world and the stories, the way that we did, was a little bit unique. Because I could read a book and then, we were always reading the newspaper too, because we had to read everything. You don't understand how hard up for entertainment we were. And so I think you start seeing the parallels earlier on in life than I think a lot of people do.
And one thing about the newspaper is several of, because you used to deliver newspapers too, Trent, because it's like you delivered newspapers for a while. Brad, one of our brothers, Brad, did for a long time, and I took it over from you guys. So I don't think I remember reading much out of the newspaper aside from, like, I was diligent with cartoons. I was reading the cartoons every single day. And I was also all about movies. So I would read like the weekly reviews or whatever for movies that were coming out and all that fun stuff. But yeah, that was definitely a thing.
I was big into the Calvin and Hobbes thing. So
Yeah.
Yes, that was a sad, dark day when Bill decided to end it. I don't. It was. I didn't know what to do anymore. I don't think I read the comics in the newspaper after that. Granted, I don't think newspapers were around for very much longer after that, really. Or maybe I just stopped paying attention because it's just Far Side was gone, Calvin and Hobbes was gone. What's the point?
right,
Yeah.
the best ones were gone. Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into kind of our subject today. So, like I said, Trent, like, he's kind of, I called him a guest at the beginning, but really you're like probably going to be very integral to this. Trent, you kind of have your own podcast that you're running and stuff. So you're probably the most experienced out of us, like doing that sort of, well, not probably, you are the most experienced. But, really, like, I think, like, this is really a place, like, we're, kind of joking about, but this isn't really exclusionary. It's just a place for, us to kind of get together and yeah, if there's something that we want to talk about, like it's just a place, an open forum for us to really just kind of dive into some of those things. Because I think from like a writing perspective, like even just from for me, right? So I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 2 years, and like maybe we can dive into that later. But I remember at that time was when I first decided, hey, I'm going to actually like start writing and taking it seriously. And that's kind of waned and come more strong, over the years and stuff. But I kind of started that. And then Nate jumped in and he kind of started writing and doing some things. And now we're kind of feeding off each other a little bit. And now it's kind of, I think, spreading to all of us. Like all of us, I think, to some extent or another, kind of had that storytelling gene, whatever you want to call it. But all of us kind of had like different places where we started.
We didn't get the math gene from Dad, so we had to do something.
I think we got the storytelling from Dad.
The storytelling, what was that like? Being able to come up with like lies on the fly, excuses for things, when we needed to like, get dad off our back or whatever.
Yeah. First of all, I feel attacked. What do you mean lies?
Hey, I wasn't pointing at you specifically.
Guilty conscience.
Oh gosh. Well, yeah. Last week we talked about Nate's first book, Starwind, and we're gonna start going through his series, and kind of just start to kind of tackle, what he's written and some of the things that I've written. But we also want to talk about upcoming projects as well. So that's with you here, Trent. That was one of the things that we wanted to start to dive into. But we also kind of wanted to talk about just a little bit more in general, like how. Because I get this a lot. Like whenever I tell people that like I'm a writer or I've written books and stuff, there's always like a few like common questions. One is definitely like, how do you come up with your stories, and also like just how do you like figure out that beginning process. So I think that's really the thing that we want to dive into with this one. Is Trent, you have a little bit of a story project, and it's like we can talk about like what that is. But also let's just maybe kind of like have a dialogue around like, yeah, what do we do? Like how do you come up with stories for as ephemeral as a concept as that is? But then like, what do you do with it? Like once you have it, right? Because it's one thing to have it in your head. It's a different thing to actually like get it on paper and have people read it, and give you feedback. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have anything you want to add to that before we really dive in, but
Nate?
Well,
no, then let's go for it.
I think
So,
did you want me to talk about ideas?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Like ideas are just I think comes basically from kind of what you're interested in. Like kind of what we talked about last time, and then when they come to you, and also from experiences too. So.
Well, and you can, and I found too, like I have one project that's further along than the other, but on my second project, I remember I met a dude at a friend's house, and we talked for a while, and I was just like, I did it. I'm basing my main character on this person. You know what I mean? Like, and sometimes it just like happens like that, and he's also a writer and all that other stuff. So, experience meeting people, just having conversations, and then sometimes you're in the shower, sometimes you wake up in the morning, sometimes whatever it is, you're driving to work and you're like, and you roll those things around in your head. At least for me, like my brain is not like organized. I think, I don't know how y'all work, but I'm chaos in between my ears. And so like I remember Nate and I have talked about this too. It's like I said last time we talked, like I think I'm an outline person, but that's not necessarily true. I can't start forming my outline until I start the story, so like it doesn't make sense because I have to start my story and then let it germinate in my brain before I get a better idea of what my outline should look like. If that makes any sense at all?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So it kind of sounds like you have to get like some concepts down on paper, like even like writing like the prologue or the first chapter, just to really kind of solidify a couple of those things in your head, and then that kind of steamrolls into you kind of getting more inspiration or something like that. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, well, I think it makes it real, right? Like once you put a character down on paper or you start the story, for me anyway, then like the weird ideas I had in my head in the beginning, I might be like, well, that actually doesn't track for this character. And so I might have to make some changes, which changes the rest of the story because, as we know, the entire ecosystem is linked and makes it insanely complicated. And that's why I have never finished a book that I've started writing. So anyway, that's to me. If it's not real yet, then my brain is not worried about it, right? So like if I'm gonna spend brain power in the shower, during the quiet times in my life, making it real first puts it on that list in my brain of things that my brain is gonna stop on and be like, hey, have you thought about this? And I'm like, I'm at baseball practice with my son. Like, why am I thinking about this? But that's when it comes up.
How for both of you guys, like how sticky are some of those ideas? Because like over the years I've developed a little bit more of a system, and it's not like a perfect system by any means, but like I've realized that it's kind of like almost like dreams. You know how fuzzy dreams become so quickly. So often I've had ideas that have come to me that it's like, oh, that's a really great idea, and I think in my head, this is such a great idea, I'm going to remember it. So when I sit down, but yeah, like what do you guys do though after you have those shower thoughts or after you have those thoughts of the baseball game? Like, what do you do with those? Like once you recognize, hey, this is something worth capturing.
I know for me, I usually don't do anything.
Glad you said that. I'm like
You know what
90%
I
of the
mean?
time, I'm like, I need to write that down, and I don't. The
Right?
rest
That's
of the
kind
time,
of like,
I got notes on my phone,
Yep.
yep.
so that's the only place that I can write it down. I always have my phone with me. I wish I didn't, but that's just the way it is. So like, and I have like a bunch of different projects going on, right? Like, so like you have to have like your Instagram notes, and you have to have your podcast notes, and then you have to have, your grocery list notes, and then your book project notes, so it's all just kind of, it's wild. Sorry, that was a lot of insight into my life.
Yeah, way too much information.
Yeah,
Well,
sorry.
I know that when I started Starwind, I kind of already had the idea of doing a trilogy at that time, and so I just decided I'm going to do this trilogy, but it's all going to take place in different cities around where I live or towns, you know. And I know
Yeah.
like with um, my next big project, that's all based on experience from where I lived or whatever, before. So the next one's going to take
Yeah.
place in Mediterranean, So
Yeah. Well, because tell us a little bit more about that. Like why the Mediterranean specifically?
well, I too, like Brett, I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as well, and I served in Italy, and it also encompassed Sicily, the boot area of Italy, and the island nation of Malta. And I spent actually most of my time in Malta. That's a great
Mm-hmm.
place. Anybody wants to go on a great vacation? Malta is your vacation destination. But anyways, but yeah. So I mean, that's why I want to write a book that encompasses the Mediterranean area, because I've been there, I've seen it.
Yeah.
I lived among the people there, so I think it'd be fun to write a book about that area.
Well, we spoke about that a little bit last time, but I think that kind of diving into that was one of the things that has fascinated me about your writing, Nate, is how, because my mind doesn't think like that, but you take like personal, like real life experiences or places or locations that you've been to, and you're able to kind of like wrap those into these kind of like otherworldly science fiction stories. And like I said, my mind doesn't work like that. Like I'm off in a totally different place, like whenever my imagination runs wild. So I think that's really cool that you're able to capture that in your head somehow, and then able to like kind of take it to that next like progressive level to put this like story into those different locations.
Yeah. So like we said before, I think of a lot of, like even Trent said, experience. Things
Yeah.
things that that you're familiar with. So
Yeah, well, and we read all those Louis L'Amour books too, right? And I think the location was a character in his
mhm.
books. Like he was always so detailed in how dangerous the environment was, and describing what these people are moving through, like the landscapes and everything like that. And I think that's what it reminds me of, is very much the location is another character. For some artists, for some authors, I'm sorry, it's very much just like in the background, like it's there. It affects the way things happen. But for the all the Louis L'Amour, and I think Nate, for you, it's location is a character,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
it very much affects the way the story flows.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like one of the things with me is when it comes to capturing ideas is kind of I have like two separate lists, like one like where it's like very a little bit more specific. It's like I know I have this particular story idea, and so I have like a list of like books or upcoming projects that I have that I'll start to fill those in with like notes and ideas as they come. Like whenever I have that idea, that shower moment, it's like, yeah, I need to capture this. I'll throw it into like a folder or something, that's associated with that. Then I have another separate list that's very much just like these are just uncategorized crazy ideas. So like I have like these things that just kind of come to me sometimes. I'm like, I don't have a story, but there's an idea here somewhere. So I'll just capture that as like a bullet point. And then sometimes there's like there's a combination of factors that comes into it. One, sometimes you just like are able to expand on those ideas. At least for me, it's like once you capture it, like it's there, right? Now it's kind of like in your brain. You can go back and reference it. And sometimes like with time, you can like look at an old idea and then expand on it like very quickly. You're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And then you can, take it to the next level. The other thing that happens, and, a lot of writers talk about this where it's, because obviously, it's pretty common now that you don't really create too many new things. Really, all we're doing as artists is combining like things together in unique ways, right? It's like cooking or any other kind of art form, right? It's like, yeah, most of these things have been done before technically, but you can kind of create everything with a unique spin, something that's unique to you. And so that's what I've also found with that list of like uncategorized ideas is I can look at that sometimes and then be like, oh, what if I take this bullet point and this bullet point, and what if I combine them together? And then you come out with something that's like totally different. But it's like just like kind of mashing some of those ideas together in a way that like you couldn't have if you hadn't actually captured those moments before.
Yeah, wizards were real. They were just using lost technology.
Yeah. Never ever been done before.
Yeah. So that's technology of vibration. That's what they used. That's anyway.
There you go. Well, what about you, Trent? Because with some of the story ideas and the one that you're kind of working on in particular, we can go into as little or as much detail as you want. How much of that was just like coming up with ideas versus, kind of like what we're talking about, like with Nate to some extent, is like how much of it is just based on real world experiences or real locations or people that you've met, like, or is it just like a huge combination of all of those things together?
Yeah, so I have like two things I'm kind of working on slowly but surely, and the first one is very much like a personal experience, like a fictional story to represent how I think the military people coming back from war
Okay.
are treated or are viewed, and how these things change over time, right? And one of those, like it's just you don't even realize you have the idea until you get real tired of people saying stuff like sheepdog, and and just how my brain works. I'm like, we're not the sheepdogs, y'all. Like we are the hunters. The hunters go out and hunt the wolves, and it's a different thing. And it's not more dangerous or less dangerous or more important or less important, but it's a different thing when you leave society that you're from and you do what you do unseen, and then you come back and then how society views that in the beginning when those wolves were at the doorstep versus when those hunters become really good, and then when the hunters are exploited and all these other things, and society eventually learns to distrust them and not like it and not understand what they're doing. So that's my first project. The second project is just like, it's funny that you say like there's no new ideas, because like when you have an idea and you're like, this is unique, right? And I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm like, well, it's Charlie's Angels with more violence type of thing, right? Like, and I've added two additional characters, or maybe three additional characters, because you always have to have a tech guy, especially these days.
Yep.
But like the human trafficking thing, I like to flip things over and turn. I like the idea of victims turning into victors or the aggressors. And so like I was like, hey, if I had the means and the time, and I was able to do certain things, like if I could take people out of the situation that they're in, train them, and then re-infiltrate those systems and figure out where they go, and to me, people that are running like human trafficking rings and all those other things, like it's very much like a vigilante type story. There's not going to be a whole lot of law enforcement involvement, so but yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with that one. And I think that one's just based on just I want to I want to use some tactics stuff and mind exercises. I
Yeah.
was talking to Nate about it. Like when you only have like, two tactics guys trying to take down certain people and all the problem sets that they run into, like it's fascinating to me.
That's awesome. And it's kind of interesting because especially like with your first story, it kind of sounds like, and I think your second story is a little bit more kind of open ended, or I'm not sure how to describe it, but your first one is kind of almost more of like a direct response to some of your experiences. So it's like so obviously that's kind of what you already said, but like um yeah, it didn't just come from like this was my experience. It was more like this was my experience and people were saying this, and that kind of spurred me to think about this new idea in a unique way.
Yeah, well, I mean, people from my own, like people from the special operations community are saying the sheepdog thing, like, "Oh, we're sheepdogs," and I
Yeah,
get it. I get what they're trying to say, but I'm
yeah,
like, in the grand scheme of things, like sheepdogs, like your law enforcement, to me, those are your sheepdogs, right? Those watch over the people, and
yep.
that's an incredibly difficult job, and I don't want that job. I don't want to be on watch, 24/7 or all the other stuff. Um, but that's not what we are. We're hunters. We go
Yeah,
out there and we're the foreign execution arm of the will of the American people. So.
hmm
Um, and then when you get back, it's a different thing. So you get back and it's totally weird because all the disassociation that you have to do is different, and you see it throughout time. Like in the beginning when the threat is real and it's close, your military folks are they're great, and then they go through some other periods where they're terrible, and then you go through like like you watch all these things play out, and then the certain parts of society don't like you or fear you or don't understand you and all these other different things, and you're going through it, and then the pushback from our side, right? Like, well, you don't understand, so like why would I listen to anything you have to say? And it creates friction, right? And friction is the root of all storytelling.
yeah, yeah. That's really cool. Do you have anything to follow up with that, Nate?
No, I think it kind of covered it. It's like you said, it's like his real world experiences. There's kind of what's brought him to be able to come up with this idea, of what he wants to
Yeah,
do. So, like I said, even I think with a lot of the stuff I wrote, I mean, with Mike, because I mean, I was stationed at a base in Albuquerque where they had some weird stuff there, and we talked about that. So that was kind of fun. I mean, be able
yeah,
to introduce some of that stuff, or at least kind of go off some of that stuff.
Look,
yeah.
the first rule of Department of Energy is you do not talk about Department of Energy. Right?
What were you talking?
Ever.
I don't know what you're talking about.
If Nate disappears tomorrow, now we know why.
It's all on the internet.
But it's interesting. Yeah. So kind of even with that first kind of story idea that you're kind of developing there, Trent. It's almost kind of like I think we talked about it a little bit like this before, but it kind of almost sounds like you're developing a little bit of a parable or like a metaphor. So, like, what kind of world are you trying to set this in? Because obviously, you're trying to convey a specific theme or idea, and like, what are your hopes in trying to kind of convey that? Like, what's the environment and setting to try to like get that point across?
Yeah, I mean, so it's going to start with I think something that everybody connects to is like the idea. So if we have sheepdogs, right? Like so like that's kind of the genesis of the idea was
Yeah,
the whole my response to the sheepdog thing. So you have to have sheep. So obviously like there's going to be, this sheep herder with his sheepdogs. He's going to have a problem. So how does he solve this problem? Because he can't stop the wolves from getting in because they're overwhelming his sheepdogs. So he's got to hire a hunter, and then like kind of like their interaction and then the relationship that's going to build from there, and why that's so important.
yeah,
And then as the wolf problem gets further and further away and as generations of people pass, right, um uh how that perception changes and how that friction changes between the people that go away, and it has to take longer and longer periods of time, or they're going further and further away to kill the wolves. And if your grandparents didn't see a wolf and your parents didn't see a wolf and you've never seen a wolf, is it really a threat type of situation,
yep,
And
yep,
so then why do I need these guys that, I don't understand, that, act a certain way, which I perceive as them thinking they're better than me. And they have their own little strange culture. Like, why should I value, what they bring to the table? And what happens when you stop valuing that and they John Galt you and disappear?
yeah. It's just so fascinating, because I love that you're kind of diving into this stuff because it just reminds me of obviously kind of how we started, talking about our childhoods a little bit. It's okay, the way that we grew up, we didn't have the TV. We were reading a lot from all kinds of different sources. It wasn't just books, it was from everywhere. But how a lot of books that we read, spurred lots of conversation and topics, things that we would try to like really kind of like hone our mental faculties, right? It's like, okay, we're trying to like figure out these ideas and things. And a lot of that came from, these books and stuff that we were reading and entertainment that we were consuming. And I always really enjoyed that, and I love that that's kind of like something that you're leaning into as well. It's like, hey, like this is supposed to be something, that people will be able to take and they'll be able to discuss it and hopefully be able to get something across, that's meaningful for people to like understand about the real world. And so I always just find it fascinating, like how people are able to take fictional stories and somehow apply them to their lives in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, and I think the danger is right. Like when Ayn Rand wrote The Fountainhead, got great reviews and sold a lot, but people just didn't grasp the direct lines. Like I think she maybe overestimated the intelligence of the general public, which sounds elitist. I know, whatever.
Yep.
But then like when people didn't grasp it, like when I read Atlas Shrugged, I don't think it's as good of a book as The Fountainhead because like how long does John Galt talk? Like 6 pages. It feels like 8 chapters when he gives that speech, and I'm like, dude, I get it. I get your views on collectivism and versus humanism and all these other things. And however you feel about, Ayn Rand and all that other stuff is irrelevant. But like to craft a story that is connects to the real world, but also just does not beat you over the head with the preachiness and the principles, I think is a very hard balance to get to, which is why I'm trying to keep it short.
Yeah.
But I have a tendency to under explain things as well. So I try to use an economy of words sometimes when I'm explaining stuff, and I think that people will pick up on it. And then a lot of times I found out throughout the years, and that's just not the case.
Well, yeah,
it's hard striking that balance.
You're blunt, I'm the same way. I have a hard time going in detail too. That's one of my struggles is trying to put something in detail enough where that people understand what I'm talking about. Describing something is hard for me sometimes. Because
it's interesting because
it's a big door. Great, they're going through it. It's like, don't you describe this door?
Yeah. Well, I think that's such a real thing that like every single storyteller or writer faces. Because it was interesting. I was actually just having a conversation with a colleague of mine, and he brought up Charles Dickens. So back in the day, Charles Dickens put in a lot of fluff into his books. Well, why did he do that? Because they were actually paying him per word for a lot of the things that he was doing. So he had an incentive to add as much detail and as much fluff as he wanted to, right? Just so, he could get that. And I think it's interesting because, sometimes, dad, is always just looking for entertainment, our father, and so like whenever he would read my books or whatever, he's like, it reads great because it's like it doesn't go into too much detail. And so, from a modern kind of economical word perspective, it's like, yeah, how much detail do you need? Like, obviously, there's such a thing as not enough detail. But then sometimes you're reading something and it's just like you're saying, Trent, with Ayn Rand, in certain situations, it's like, we get it. Like, you don't, like, once you go into too much detail in some situations, or you like just hit the nail on the head so hard, it takes the reader out of the experience. And now it's actually like a detriment to the whole writing and reading, experience altogether. So
I've read books where they start going into something. Yeah. And I'm just like, okay, I'm flipping through the pages. Like, when is this over? Like, this description.
Yeah.
Was this your doctorate thesis? You know what I mean? Like, because that's how it feels sometimes. Is they're trying to get that point across, and it's like I get it. So like, I think Michael Crichton did a good job of that. Is being technical, without losing the thread of entertainment, which is, I think the older I get, the more I think about it, is so difficult to do, to live in like that science fiction world. And to take like his giant brain and download a piece of it and and do all his research, but still make it entertaining, like and with great characters and all those other things. So it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things I struggle with when I write is trying to yeah, just descriptions, you know, trying and I'm not an over. I don't like to overanalyze stuff. I'm not a big analyzer, and so it's like I'm not going to sit there and discuss this what this person's thinking. You know what I mean? It's like what the character's thinking at the moment, unless it's really relevant to what's going on. But
But
you know, it's
but
like
Brett gets into character thoughts and
yeah,
feelings, right? What like that chapter that we were discussing the other day, Brett, about the guy's trepidation before jumping in to steal something from the thing that no one knows what it is and all these other things. Like I think that's interesting, because like that's very human. Like that's something that we all gravitate towards. Is like, yeah, we get nervous and no one like at least I struggle, right? Like, and I've always told you guys, like I struggle with like the Hobbit books because I don't want
oh,
my heroes to be whiny. I don't like Luke Skywalker's, but I want them to be human. I don't want them to be robots. And so once again, that balance for me is very important.
oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to build your characters. You know, people need to understand your characters and have feelings for characters. I guess you know. Because when you read a book, and I've cried in books, at the end of books or whatever, or different parts of different books, I've been emotional.
Well, that's interesting though, because it's probably it's those emotional moments, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but like those emotional moments probably didn't come from the points like where you're saying what a character is thinking per se. It's like, yeah, you do enough of that so you can understand the character, and so then when the character is put into a certain situation, as the reader, you intuitively know
Mhm.
what that character is going through,
Right.
right? So it's like they can kind of go into a little detail, as the writer probably, but like like I said, if you hit the nail on the head too hard, it just takes you out of the experience. So there's like that delicate balance of like, yeah, make sure that the people know who the character is, and that's one thing that I struggle with as characters.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think like all my characters are kind of cardboard cutouts to some extent. So I'm always trying to like expand. It's like, hey, this guy needs like something that's unique. Like this guy is a different thing than this other guy. But sometimes it's hard to strike that. But yeah, if you do it right, you can establish it and say, yeah, this guy is this way. He thinks this way. So naturally, when he's put in this situation, well, shoot, like how is he going to respond and how is he feeling?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's kind of the goal that we should probably work towards. Because like I've seen, like I went to like film school and stuff, and sometimes I would see people just do stuff where it was just so blatant and obvious. It's just like, what the heck are you doing? Like, we get it. Like, we're humans, we understand, and so because we struggle with putting in enough detail, but then there's some people who struggle with the opposite side of that, where it's like too much. It's just like, gosh, the Ayn Rand situation or whatever. It's just like, it's too much. It's too much. You just got to find that balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Character development's a big one.
Let's oh, go ahead. Do you have something else, Trent?
No, I was gonna talk about Dad some more. Yeah, because Dad, that's the opposite, right? Like, because he's like when you talk about like movies, he's like, oh, great special effects and action, and I'm like, if I don't connect to a character, it's not a good movie,
Yeah.
So like I don't know how many movies I've seen where I'm like, that could have been great if there was a single character that I cared about or that I related to, but I relate to zero of these people, and it doesn't even have to be like anything crazy, like that movie Tenet, right, with Christopher Nolan. The main character, I knew almost nothing about that dude, and the guy that ended up playing the Batman, the vampire dude, who like with very little dialogue as you go through the story, I ended up becoming, like I really liked those characters. So like it doesn't take much a lot of the time, but you see how they react to the situations. In the beginning, that he's the good dude because he walked through the fire and passed the test, which was I think that whole conversation was probably like 8 sentences, whatever it was. But you learn so much about the characters in such a short period of time that I very much connected to them. So it doesn't take like a ton of dialogue, but there has to be redeeming qualities. There has to be something that I connect to. So then that's why Avatar is the worst movie ever made.
Hot take alert right there.
So bad.
You don't connect to any of those characters? Come on.
No,
oh man,
Fern Gully Part 6.
Oh gosh, yeah, I really struggled with that movie too. And to your point, though, it's like I definitely realized at a certain point that I kind of rejected Dad's kind of dogmatic view with that. Like him, it was like, well, a movie needs an explosion. If it has that and some action, it's good. You know, kind of like what you said. And it's like, yeah, no, for me, like it needs to be a lot more than that. To your point, you know, it's not enough to just like have some whatever in it. Like, yeah, you need that character. You need someone that you can invest in, someone that you can to some extent relate to. And it's really hard to really get invested into a story if you don't have that.
Well, I think a part of it probably is he didn't grow up reading books the way we did.
True.
And so I don't think it's as important. And also for him to protect, not or stick up for our dad. He's a very tech driven guy. And so like especially when special effects became very computer driven and like he was like on the ground floor of caring about computers because he's a giant nerd. Like, so he appreciates things on a whole different level than we do because he can appreciate like how much work went into, making those things happen. Or I'm just like, I don't care. Like I'm a people person, Dad. Like he has a secretary for that. That's a joke. It's an Office Space joke. Never mind.
I got a question. like Brett, like when you're doing developing your main character of any book that you write, do you ever think of like a movie actor or anything that you know that you kind of relate that character to? You know what I mean? Like when you're writing, do you see this person in your head as you're writing about this character?
Oh gosh. Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a good example. With some of my earlier books, I'm trying to remember if that was the case. Yeah, no, because actually I remember like I put together kind of like a board on some app, like where it was like I would take a screenshot of some actor. It was like probably Christian Bale at the time or something, and put him here as this character. And specifically for the first book that I wrote, 0 Hour, there was the character Captain Moggs, and he had red hair. And I forget his name. Is it Damian Lewis? He was the guy that played in Band of Brothers.
Oh, that guy.
And and he's played in several other things. But I always kind of pictured Captain Moggs as him. And that kind of helped me, not just because of his physical characteristics, like the red hair, but obviously that was a big part of it. But it was kind of like the way that he carries himself and the way that he's like self-confident, but not like overly like aggressive. Some of those qualities of that actor actually kind of helped kind of shape the character that I was making a little bit to some extent. It kind of put guardrails on it. It's probably like a good way of describing it. And even now it's like I haven't started really writing it, but it's still kind of like an idea that I've been outlining. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier, like when it comes to coming up with stories. But I have this story called The Red List. The title might change, but I kind of I'm really sick of Marvel MCU movies these days and most superhero movies, because a lot of them has just gotten so crazy and, to the point of being able to connect with characters is like, I just can't anymore, But the other thing is I feel like that the action in a lot of these movies has gone down. So I was trying to conceptualize like what I could do. And I kind of came up with this idea of like, could I cross a superhero movie with like a Bourne Identity style movie, where it was like very kind of grounded, a little bit more espionage action as opposed to like grandiose save the world kind of stuff. But there's like a character in it that is I've imagined to be Japanese American. And I forget the name, who the actor is exactly, but I have this actor in mind that like I actually like went to ChatGPT and kind of like had it like, or not ChatGPT, but like one of those AI art things, and had it kind of like draw up like the cover of the book, and I was using that guy as kind of like my reference. And I got something else, was like, okay, yeah, now I kind of know who this guy is. And then I was able to kind of start really kind of working on the character traits and characteristics off of that. So not always, not in every situation, but some of the key elements, like if I just need to say, I need to nail down this particular character very specifically, sometimes that method has helped me out a little bit. But how about you, like with the stories that you've written? Obviously we've kind of talked about, like, you put a lot of focus into the environment and terrain and the locations and stuff, but like, what do you do with your characters? Like, did they just kind of come from scratch or not?
They're all Sam Elliott.
I didn't think about him when I was kidding. That was kind of like more of I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy that played Negan in Walking Dead. Because he's got he's that dark hair. He's he was kind of guy I was thinking of, or like John Hamm.
Oh yeah.
You're talking about John Bernthal?
No, not Bernthal. The guy who played Negan.
Yeah, you can
That's his name, right?
name
Negan, the
Walking
bad
Dead
guy in that.
characters all day long, and I'll
It's
have
been a
no
long
idea who
time
you're
since I've
talking
seen any
about.
Walking Dead stuff, but
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I know exactly who you're talking about, Nate, but I
what
forget
was
his
his name?
name.
Though?
He was in Supernatural.
Yeah, he's been in some different shows here and there. And
Yeah.
then John Hamm kind of reminded me of him too, so I kind of always
Okay,
had him as
Jeffrey Dean
well.
Morgan. I'm gonna keep trying. Sorry.
Oh yeah, Jeffrey Dean Morgan. I think
Is
that's
that his
him.
name? Okay, that's kind of who. That's kind of the guy. That's the guy I was kind of had in my head as I was developing my character for Agent Rockwell. You know, Owen Rockwell. So
Uh-huh.
that's kind of guy who, if I ever did a movie or anything, it'd be like, hey, John Hamm or somebody, you know, come play this. What about you, Trey? Have you ever thought about that with with your project that you're working on?
Well, like when I met that dude at my friend's house, he's like the inspiration for like the feel of the character.
Okay.
Mhm.
Because my main character is gonna be like a former like football wrestler type. So like he's gonna be like a hefty dude who like let himself go on purpose,
Mhm.
so that he seems less like what he is. You know, like an intelligent type guy that's running this operation to do these things. You know, like he's trying to look more like the sad, pathetic guy that would, you know, visit these places where he can find these people to rescue, and then, you know, turn a few of them into agents, right? So, you know, always trying to like, you know, like let his hair be crazy, like obviously like balding, you know, crazy facial hair, but also trying to hide like his muscle mass and his physical prowess, right? So,
Uh-huh.
gaining a little bit of weight, you know, shuffling around the clothes that he's wearing are gonna like send us a very specific message. But then my two tactical guys, like, I know what they're gonna look like, but like that's more based on like mixtures of people that I've met along the way, you know. So kind of like over the top in a few ways, just so that people know exactly who I'm talking about, you
Yeah.
know, like the character of who it is, you know, like there's very
Yeah.
specific, you know, caricatures of guys in the community, you know. So like I think I told you, Nate, like you're gonna have like your surfer dude who like seems like he doesn't care, but you know, deep down inside he has a lot of the same traits as the guy that's super professional, likes to wear suits, you know, clean shaven 100% of the time, you know, like probably invests his money wisely. The other guy is like on a surfboard, hacky sack, flip flops, cut off shorts, and all these other stuff. But
Right.
at the end of the day, while they use, you know, different tactics and some, you know, different mindsets, you know, and approaches to get the job done, you know, they're both there to get the job done. So I don't use like actors. I don't think it's just I have a lot of people, and it's funny because you brought up Brett, the redheaded guy, and
Yeah.
as you were like talking about the actor dude, I was like, that's not who I envisioned at all. Like
Mm.
every redhead dude that I've ever worked with, like in the military, they're usually a lot of them are stouter dudes, you know. And so in my mind, a redheaded, you know, highly trained, you know, top of the food chain type of guy, they're they're like, you know, little muscle guys. Like all the redheads are, you know, little Vikings. So that's what I envisioned.
That's so awesome. Yeah, well, I mean, it's just one of those things. Like it is just incredible, like how dynamic all of that is, and you know, it's not until you're asked the question sometimes where you're like, how do I do that? You know, it's like, you know, because it's just like sometimes your thoughts are so random as you're coming up with these ideas. But I think it's really cool to talk about them because then you can start to kind of recognize it a little bit more. It's like, oh yeah, I'm making this kind of deliberate choice, or or you know, this one maybe I'll do something a little bit different. Let me try to come up with this character a different way, or you know, however that plays out in your writing style.
Yeah, because I noticed like with my other characters in my books, I didn't really have anybody else in my head for those ones. It was just the main character. So all the
Just
other
like
ones were just kind of
NPCs
like
walking around.
right.
Well, the other thing is, you know, and you know, this is a lot about characterization, and the other thing, and I think we can all probably relate to this to some extent, but kind of like what you were saying, Nate, where it's not just that you always have like a predefined character either. You know, a lot of times for me, a lot of characterization comes out as I'm actually doing the writing. Like as I'm going through that process, the characters really start to flesh out and evolve. Like as you get those words onto the paper, and it's kind of cool like when that happens because at a certain point, like I don't know how much of this you guys have experienced, sometimes it kind of feels like, yeah, the character actually has taken on a life of its own. And, you kind of know that person. So obviously it's like you're still in control of the character and stuff, but like I think it clicks at a certain point where you're like, okay, I got it. Like I get like who this guy is, or who this woman is, and you can really just kind of like take it from there. But sometimes it takes like a little bit of kind of tinkering, like as you're going through the writing process, for it to finally click, and it's like, okay, I got it.
Right.
Well, and as characters go on arcs too, right? Like you can't have them react the exact same way to every situation, right? Like how boring would that be? It's like,
Yeah.
so like you have to have arcs, and I've read I don't know how many books where I'm like, oh, I expect this person to be a good person the whole time. Like the first 3 chapters, I have a preconceived notion in my head about what's going to happen. And it's like, boom, something happens to the outside of character B's control. All of a sudden, they did something to betray character A, and it's just like, how could this happen? I don't, so. And I don't like to assign like a fixed morality to any of my characters either, because I think redemption is a huge thing that you got to talk about all the time. But like the idea of like a permanently good or a permanently bad person is I don't know. I don't think I could write in that way. Obviously, like in certain ways, like so I'm gonna have like my main group of characters, right? Like it's weird, right? Like so like my core group of characters, there's going to be ups and downs and friction and all these other things that happen, but obviously they're going to shoot a lot of people in the face, so like they're just because those people are kind of irredeemable, the ones doing the other things, so there is a point of no return. But like for the rest of them, there's going to be some ups and downs and frictions and all that other stuff.
What?
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because like even kind of taking that idea in the other direction, like we keep saying, writing is always like a balance. It's always a matter of extremes. Because I've read books before, or even movies, right? Like any kind of media entertainment. But one thing that drives me nuts is like when a character does something that is so out of character just because the story needs something to happen. And even authors that I like really greatly respect and are very, very professional, sometimes I'm reading a book and something like that happens. It's like, where did that come from? Like because I agree with you. It's like characters shouldn't be like good or bad necessarily. But yeah, sometimes like you have like this guy who has never exhibited any kind of this behavior at all, and then he just turns on a dime and does this weird, crazy thing. And it's like, wait, where the heck did that come from? And that's another one of those things where it's like, yeah, if you don't get the balance right, that's another thing that can take the reader out of the experience, I feel like.
Well, yeah, there needs to be. You got to have some consistency with your main character, especially like in something I wrote, because you have this main guy, right? So he's got to be somewhat consistent in most things that he does, And I kind of I didn't want him to be a bad guy, but Trent's right, I mean, you can't really assign a sense of total good or bad because you never know what situation the guy's gonna come up against, So,
I mean, well, and if he's human, then there's both, no matter what, right? Like so. You have to show it, and it's not like we can get on here and be like, no, I've never made a mistake in my life. I'm a totally good person. Like that would be silly. So like if you're not exploring some of that through the story, like then what are we talking about?
Yeah.
If it's not a story of at least a little bit of redemption and struggle, like then what's the point?
Yeah. Because I'm not even sure if I even did that right in the ones I did, the books I wrote, because I tried to keep him, and I gave him a love interest and all that, and he had that, I don't know. It's just.
Oh, on that point, I have a funny story.
Okay.
So, because this is actually something, because like with my first book, 0 Hour, I'm rewriting it now. Because like back then I kind of self-published it, but I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to do like anything with that. And so it's like my family read it and they all loved it and stuff, but like full of errors, full of plot holes and all kinds of different stuff. And sometimes like the pacing and the flow was just like all over the place. So I'm slightly editing it and re-updating it currently. And but I remember specifically like there were times like where like I'd thrown in a little love interest just because it's like, well, that's what writers do, But I remember our oldest brother Corey, mentioned once, he's like, who is this lady? Like, I don't know. She's there, And so sometimes like things like that happen where I was just like, yeah, especially as I'm like revisiting it, it's like this relationship, not that I'm opposed to the romantic relationship to some extent, but my approach to it was just like completely wrong. So like there'll be some like updates to that, like with this new version. But yeah, it's like it's so funny, like when that stuff, like you see it in your own stuff, you're like, wait, where the heck did that come from? It's like you're following a cliche, or you're doing something, or you just didn't even think about it. You didn't think it through. So then someone else reads it and they're like, what the heck was that all about?
Yeah.
Did it push the story forward, or
Yeah.
was it just something that we do?
Right.
Yeah.
Detract from it or not? It's like
Well, and that brings up a good point too. Like how focused do you need to be on the story? We were talking about guardrails for characters earlier, but that you need, if you're trying to say something, if you're trying to like point out very specific parts of the story to get to where you're going, like how long is this book going to be? What are you trying to get to? Like how far off the rails in either direction? How many tangents can you take that lead back to like the same conclusion, without it becoming overly complicated and detracting from the story?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, because when I was writing mine, I'm like, well, how long do I make this book? I'm like, well, I had a goal for myself. I'm like, I want at least be 200 pages, So, but then like you're right, how much other stuff do you stick in there to try to extend it out that long? It's like,
Yeah.
do you just keep going and just keep,
Because I actually wrote a book called White Serpent, and it's a little bit of like a science fiction post-apocalyptic type story. And I remember I ran into that kind of same like crisis where I was trying to turn it into like a full-length novel, but it only has 2 characters in it. And it was like, okay, like I know like where the story needs to end, but at some point I just realized I'm just adding, like, just like we talked about earlier, I'm just adding fluff for the sake of adding fluff. It's really not doing anything aside from just making it more of like a fetch quest for these characters. Like, well, I guess I could add this in and I could add this in, but then they're just going from this location to this location to get the next thing, to get the next thing, to finally make it to the end of the story. Like, it just didn't need it. So I ended up just kind of keeping it, not that book or the flow of it was completely perfect, but I try to trim it to keep it in scope of the story. It's like, yeah, what's happening? Is it in service of the story? Is it developing the characters in a meaningful way? And if it wasn't, if I'm just sending the characters on a fetch quest, okay, that's really not in service of the story. I'm not writing the Rise of Skywalker here, It's
yeah. It's like, and also, when's the right time to off certain characters? You know what I mean? So I have to have that in my books. Okay, I mean, people got to die, right? So it's like,
yeah.
Well, and you got to be dedicated to that, right? Like I'm not like a Game of Thrones guy, but like that guy throughout that series, like he was known for like, hey, I'm gonna put a lot of time developing this character and then just kill them off. So like he had like a style, right? Like, so like you have to be consistent, I think, with those things, at least in like a series, or if you're doing a trilogy, you can't go from like, people are dying and then like, or wait till like book 3 and then like your main character dies, or people, you're just like, wait, this is not that kind of book. Like, you're not just, like all of a sudden, like, people are getting slaughtered that we cared about. Like, you're just trying to ruin everything at the very end.
And then how gory do you make it? I mean, how far do you go on that respect, It's like, I guess I got kind of gory with my second book. Well, I didn't think it was that gory, but some people think I did.
It wasn't that bad. But I remember, not with gore, but I remember Star Winds, especially, like, there was a few like scenes in that book that were actually like really kind of like suspenseful and scary. That kind of surprised me. I was like, wow, like not like super, but like it did kind of get me like what is going to happen next? It's like it really did kind of pull me in with some of that stuff. But like, yeah, obviously it's just like with anything, too much or too little is a bad thing, right? So it's like, yeah, finding that balance. And with characters dying, I actually wanted to point one thing out with my first book, 0 Hour, because it's like with the first one, right? It's like there's so many things that happen that just kind of like imprint on your memory. And some of your later books, like people say stuff, it just kind of is like, okay, yeah, that's cool, But Trent, I actually remember specifically, you mentioned something about one of the characters that died in that book. And it was like, that has stuck with me for like a long time, because it was such a weird feeling that I had created a character that you had connected with. And it actually, like, even if it was like such a small throwaway thing that you said to me, like, it was like, oh, like, he specifically called that out. Like, that was so interesting. Sometimes like when those things happen, like, okay, that actually made an impact.
Yeah, you killed the enlisted guy off, and I was like, bro, like, why are you killing the officer's gonna make it or whatever it was, and I was just like, that hurt a little bit. That's how you feel about me. Dude, I had a buddy who was I was helping him. He was writing this book about some like a cross border. It was like a revenge book. Like he had like one of those anti-heroes that was going on a quest to kill a bunch of people that had done some things. And I remember we sat down and we had a conversation about like how to torture people amongst other things. And it's kind of terrifying to sit down and to be like, how would I like you flesh out the character that you're torturing first, so you know what they're scared of, and then like you start to walk at the dog on like how to terrify that person and how to maximize impact not only on them, but like are we also like leaving him behind to like terrorize like his clan or his people or his gang or whatever else. And it's like the human mind is a scary thing, so it can be a little weird, walking the dog on some of those ideas.
Well, I know
that's intense.
Yeah, I know for me, like when I get these certain points when I'm writing, it's like, how far do I want to take it? It's like, should I go this direction or should I just kind of keep it mellow? So how I guess it's comfortability level.
Yeah, and I've read some of the Jack Carr books. And I know like his main character is like a Navy SEAL, blah blah blah, but he's got
what book series is that? Is that the Terminal List or is that a different series?
Yes, the Terminal List guy. But the tomahawk thing, where he like cuts dudes open with a tomahawk and all that other stuff, and I'm just like, hey, I get it that like you're trying to like show how savage this dude is. But I am so much more drawn to the professional killer than I am to the emotional killer. You know what I mean? Like, why, as a trained professional, assaulter in the United States military, would you resort to, when you don't have to, using your hatchet to kill somebody? Like, like, I don't know. Also, like if we talk about like a other thing, I'm an Immanuel Kant guy, right? Like I don't think torture is justice, so I think that bothers me too. Like I'm not trying to like torture people. The death penalty for me should not be torture. Like you run into people that are like, oh, we should torture people and make them feel the same pain. Like A, that's impossible. B, that's not justice. That's revenge. And so like when people start crossing those lines, and I think he might do it to make people like me uncomfortable a little bit with the story. But that's not really my jam if there's not like a purpose behind it.
Yeah, that comes up, with like all kinds of things, because I don't like that either. Like when a creator crosses a certain line and like trying to force you to feel something generally unpleasant, but in a way like you're saying is like probably uncharacteristic of whatever story it is that you're telling, and it starts to make it kind of feel weird, when they go too far in certain ways.
I know, like in my books, it's usually, the three I did, it's usually the aliens killing people. So,
go as far as you want. Who cares?
This book I'm writing right now, it's going to be a little different, but I gotta get it done. But
to them, it's like pulling the legs off a grasshopper, killing humans. It's not a big deal,
But it is interesting because even like to a very much like less extreme, way, like once again, going back to 0 Hour, when I was writing that one, the main character is very much kind of like a narcissist, cynic, nihilistic type of person. And I probably have more of those qualities in myself than I realize, but at the same time, I always kind of think of myself as more of like an optimistic type person. Right. And it's like, it's worth believing in things that are virtuous, right? And like upholding certain things. Like I like to think that about myself, whether or not that's true, but but writing that guy specifically as this thing, like this thing that I, it took a little bit of like trying to like wrap my mind around that a little bit. Cause sometimes I kind of felt like it's just like, is this even real? Like, do people even think like this? Like, or whatever, So, But it was interesting trying to develop that. But then it's like as he's running across these other characters and he's kind of getting his like viewpoints, his view of the world kind of checked and put in place as he kind of goes throughout the story. That was definitely kind of a fun experience, almost as like more of a mental experiment, as an individual. It's like, yeah, what happens when you do try to put yourself in that mental space? Because people talk a lot about empathy. And I think that writing is probably like one of the best ways to actually like, get empathetic with people that have different mindsets than you.
Yeah. I think a lot of authors do that, so.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, I don't know how you guys are, but like, I'm not saying I'm schizophrenic, but I'm saying I got a lot of different people up in my head, so like when we talk about your characters, right? Like you said, like I am a narcissistic, selfish piece of crap. I am also someone that cares deeply about humans and do my best to make everybody around me happy. You know what I mean? I'm all these people, like even my characters in my book, like I am in some ways the surfer guy, and in some ways I am like the guy that takes things almost too seriously all the time and wants to perfect my craft. Like, and I am the behind the scenes guy. I'm the I like to talk in front of people. Like I'm all these people, and the more than one thing can be true at one time, right? Like it's like, but like it's like looking at history, right? And seeing like, oh, these people wrote these words, but they didn't really believe in them because they didn't live, according to their own principles. It's like, yeah, because they're humans. Like, but that doesn't mean that like what we're aspiring to is wrong, even though I'm not living up to my own standards. So like that's a human experience. So I think like, as your character runs into all those different people, you're probably running into different pieces of yourself, and like it's probably like your own journey through becoming a better person in a lot of ways. And you run into situations or other people that help you see things from different perspectives, and a little piece of you, gets stronger, and you're able to drop a little bit of that narcissistic nonsense along the way.
Right. I mean, I think, did we talk about this, Brett, before, where like your personal values and stuff will come out? A lot of see a lot of authors do that. Well, maybe you do. We talked Trent last. Maybe we talked about that too. I can't remember, but
we talked about it being terrifying because it's hard to write without exposing who you are.
Right. Yeah. But yes. Some of your person of who you are is definitely come out in your writing. I see it when I write my stuff, because you're interested in whatever you're writing that for a reason. You're writing this book for a reason.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to kind of wrap up here, because I think it's so cool and interesting thinking about that, because kind of talking even about Trent's book, I was like, okay, like you kind of almost have like this like parable type story and stuff, but it's like, and with the things that I've written or that you've written, Nate, yeah, I think that's probably true. Like getting very philosophical here, but it's like the things that you're writing, it's maybe these themes and stuff, like you're kind of trying to say, I want to put this out into the world so people can understand it. Probably what's more realistic is like, these are things that I need to understand. These are things that I need to like learn to cope with or struggle with or figure out, because like whether it's your characters or the theme of the story and it all comes together, it's like, yeah, those are the things that are going on in your head, so it's a good way to kind of get those thoughts out into the real world, and hopefully someone else can benefit from that as well. It's like writing, storytelling for me isn't just entertainment. It is also it's a way to have discussions and debates and talk about things in a way that's just outside of, what you can come up with on your own.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we all share a lot of the same struggles on our own hero journey in our own lives, right? So like, I think that's what we all relate to. That's the story.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up. So, second episode. Woo! Yeah, no, it's really cool talking with you guys. It's always fun because it kind of feels like the good old days, to some extent, right? It's like it gives us an excuse to get together and talk about this stuff again. So I love it.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it's
cool.
It's fun to jump on here and nerd out a little bit. That's not what we talk about on my podcast. So
you need to nerd those guys up a little bit.
We nerd out a little bit, but it's different,
Yeah, totally different. Awesome. Okay, well, let's go ahead and stop it there and tune in next week, and we'll see you. And also, if you've made it to the end here, don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to be producing podcasts where not only do we, bring in our family, because like I said, this is kind of a family venture, but we hope to bring on other authors and other people that we can talk to and that have really interesting ideas. So hopefully we can really just start to expand this and, hopefully provide some value and entertainment along the way also.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Appreciate
Let's
it.
go ahead and call it. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.